My aim this evening is to start out with a premise that some of you might find a bit shocking or might sound a bit extreme or over the top, the idea that misogyny is a form of terrorism that nobody is talking about, and to leave you thinking that actually, if anything, that statement is a bit of an understatement. And really, in order to do that, all we need to do is join the dots. All we need to do is think about connections and following things and recognizing how things are interrelated in ways that society doesn't want us to. And that's why I need to start by talking about the broader context of the society that we live in, because extremism of any kind is only able to flourish in a society in which low-level behaviours, low-level instances of inequality and prejudice are overlooked, are considered normal, are excused, and which individuals are expected to shut up, put up with them, and get on with things without making a fuss. So it is significant that this particular form of extremism flourishes against the background context of a society that remains anything but equal. And it's important to say that there are so many people who will deny that this is the case. When I started talking about the Everyday Sexism Project, there were so many people, and they remain so today, who would say, you're making a fuss about nothing, women are equal now, there's no real problem, we don't need to talk about this. People who want to talk about sexism are overreacting feminazis looking for something to be offended by. But the reality is that the statistics paint a very different picture. The reality is that even after our most recent election, just 40% of our MPs are women, around 18 of our 108 High Court judges, around 7 of our 38 Lord Justices of Appeal, that there are over 3 times as many men named John running FTSE 100 companies as all the women put together. In other words, anywhere where power and control are concentrated in a small number of hands, those people making the decisions that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis are not broadly representative of the communities that they serve. And this is also true elsewhere, because of course people will listen to those statistics and accuse you of cherry picking. They'll say, oh, you've concentrated on politics and business, but look at the arts, look at the media. You'll find that women outnumber men in other areas, that things even out across the board. The reality, of course, again, is very different, that there are 2,300 works of art in the National Gallery and 21 of them are by women, that there are 573 listed statues around the UK, but just 15% of them are of women and only 2 of a named black woman. The reality is that women only write a quarter of our front page newspaper articles, that 84% of those articles are about a man, that we only take 28% of speaking roles in films, but are 3 times more likely than men to have to take our clothes off on screen. We're just a 10th of engineers, a 5th of architects. The Royal Society, our most important scientific institution, has fewer than 10% of its fellows who are women. The truth is you don't need to cherry pick, because the reality is that this is an inequality that is all around us, that is absolutely present in every sphere of our society. And yet it is also a society that tells us that this is a women's problem to fix, that women should avoid becoming victims, that women should be careful, that women should make sure that we wear flat shoes in case we need to run, that we don't wear short skirts because we'll be asking for it, that we cover our drinks and text each other when we get home safe and walk with our keys between our fingers. And we do all of those things because of a society that tells us that it's our fault and that we're responsible for preventing it, in spite of the fact that there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that that's the case. So it's important to recognise that, because everything else that we're going to come on to discuss this evening couldn't be the case if it weren't for a society where inequality and underlying misogyny are overwhelmingly common. And this is something that has been very clearly illustrated by the Everyday Sexism Project, which I started over a decade ago, and which has now amassed over 250,000 people's testimonies of their experiences of all different kinds of gender inequality, from people all over the world, from people of all different backgrounds. And again, it's absolutely clear from that data set, which is now the largest of its kind, that connections are perhaps the most important thing we need to recognise when we are thinking about this problem. Because overwhelmingly, the project makes clear the connections between sexism and other forms of prejudice. For example, the stories we receive which include elements of sexism alongside racism, homophobia, ableism, transphobia, ageism, and they are not neatly separate as our society likes to separate them into International Women's Day and Pride Month and Black History Month. but rather things that people experience cumulatively when they live at the heart of those intersections. For example, a disabled woman being told to do a pole dance around her walking stick, a black woman waiting to give the keynote speech at a conference, only to find that she was constantly interrupted by people asking her to bring them refreshments because they assumed she was a member of staff at the venue. Women who were in the street with their female partners and saw harassment dramatically escalate as a result, or older women who again and again use the word invisible in their project entries. And that linguistic analysis is also incredibly important in picking up on those intersections, which tell us very clearly not just that this is an intersectional problem, but also that the solution must be intersectional in order for it to be successful, in order for it to be fit for purpose. And those intersections will matter when we come on to talk about the forms of extremism that we're going to delve into this evening, because there too, extreme misogyny very rarely exists on its own. It is part of a complex symbiosis that also involves white supremacy, that also involves homophobia, and so on. And the next connection that came out really clearly that's also crucial to the issues that we'll talk about this evening was the connection between experiences of men and boys and those of women and girls. We are living in the midst of a backlash, which we will talk about in more detail later on, where there is an intense effort to send the message that to talk about feminism or women's rights is to hate men, to want to undermine them, to threaten them, to want to take their jobs away, to threaten their livelihoods. The reality is that the opposite is true. The reality is not just that we can care about the issues facing men and boys, but they are, of course, part and parcel of exactly the problems that feminism seeks to address. And nowhere is that more clear than in the project entries. We would hear from a 6-year-old girl who was kicked off the football pitch at break time and an 11-year-old boy who was bullied for taking dance lessons. We would hear from a woman in the workplace who was told she wouldn't be considered for a promotion because she was a maternity risk, and a man who had been denied extended parental leave to spend time with his young child. It was so clear that these things are connected. If we are making assumptions, for example, about gender roles in terms of caregiving and who is best suited to be sacrificing parts of their career to raise children, those are exactly the same gendered assumptions and constraining stereotypes that are preventing men from having the ability to spend more time with their children. If we look at an issue that is raised online as a reason to shut down feminist conversations like the male suicide rate, we can so clearly trace the origins of that problem to the fact that men are dramatically less likely to receive mental health support when they're in crisis than women are, which has been really clearly shown to originate in early gender roles, the idea that boys don't cry, that men are tough and manly. In other words, it is gender stereotypes that are literally killing men and boys. This was never about setting up men against women. It was never a gender war or a battle of the sexes. But as we know, fear is an extremely effective weapon. It's an extremely effective way to radicalize and to create an audience and a supportive base. And that's what we're going to see in terms of how that has been weaponized to create this particular form of extremism. And the final connection that I think is crucial that came out from the project entries was between the small stuff, the banter, the low-level sexism, the sexist jokes and the unwanted comments, and the more serious forms of abuse. Because you can see that the same gendered slurs crop up in the story of a woman experiencing street harassment who's been told not to make a fuss, and the story of a woman being abused behind closed doors. Because the reality is that if we say this is no big deal, don't make a fuss, it's just a compliment, learn to suck it up, get a sense of humour. I'd love it if someone wolf whistled at me. It's just boys being boys. He probably likes you. All we're really saying is that as a society, we will sign up to a contract of a power imbalance where when women's bodies and girls' bodies from a very young age are in public spaces, they are public property, that men are entitled to a sense of ownership and power over those bodies and that there's nothing women can do about it. And that is, of course, exactly the same dynamic at the root of the more serious forms of abuse. So from the very earliest days of the project, it's been so clear that drawing these kinds of connections, making patterns, seeing patterns where people don't want us to see them is absolutely crucial to recognizing this problem for what it is. And it's only when we see it that we can solve it.